Hello, everyone. Welcome to the When at Work podcast. You're with the host, Julian Leahy, and today I'm joined by the fantastic Bill Boulden from Boulden, New York. Welcome to the show, Bill.
Hello, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me, Julian.
And Bill is a very interesting person. He's involved in a lot of startups, and he works as what's called a fractional CTO. So a CTO is a chief technical officer, the person who basically does all of the building to bring SaaS solutions to market, make them work, does all the stuff that's under the hood. And a lot of startups don't really have access to, Y Combinator and things like that. And they're bootstrapping. And a cost-effective way is to hire a fractional CTO to help with all the building. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what that is, Bill?
Sure. So I specialize in what's called the 0 to 1 phase of a product's life cycle, which is from when the idea is first conceived until the launch where you have something. There's a lot of phases that come after that. There's 1 to 10, 10 to 100, 100 to 1,000, 1,000 to exit. But I'm specializing in those early days. And in those early days, founders don't have access to a lot of capital. But an all-star Silicon Valley CTO can cost you full-time $250,000 or more. I've seen $300,000, $400,000 salaries. I come in at a much lower price point where they're getting me for a fraction of the time, but still getting everything they need to get a product out to market with for a shorter engagement, where I'll be your full-time CTO for something like 2 months and then taper into being your half-time CTO and then your quarter-time CTO, so that these people, these founders who may have just won a pitch competition or they're digging into their own savings, they may have 50 to 100 grand to play with. That's enough to bring a product to market simply and easily. And you only need 6 to 8 weeks if you define MVP downward enough.
Interesting. And the other thing is, if you've got one of these Silicon Valley CTOs, typically they're asking for a bit of equity in the company as well. Not always, but often, so you typically just work basically as a contracted CTO. You don't get any equity in the companies. You just do the job for them.
No, I'm always interested in equity, and I cut my rates in exchange for equity because it depends on the client. For some of these clients, equity is very cheap to them. They're handing it out like candy.
Yeah.
Others are jealously guarding their equity because they're in the middle of going through a fundraise. So I have what I call my full cash rates. If you're not going to give me any equity, I cost a certain amount of cash. I will cut that in half if you give me 1% of your company. I will cut it in 1/3 if you will give me 2% of your company.
Do you prefer the deal with the equity or not?
I need a little bit of a mix because I need to keep food on the table. But it's really fun to have so many horses in the race. I have equity across about 10 different companies that could all succeed at any point. And it's really great to still be so invested in their success. Like some of them, I haven't worked. The company I'm proudest of building, Hello Audio, which is one of my favorite startups I've ever worked on. I haven't worked for them in about 6 months, but it's still great to know that when they win, I win. And it just keeps me on great terms with everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're invested in their success, and also it's kind of low risk for you. I mean, it's you're a part of it. You're helping them, but you're not really. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work.
Exactly. And you'd be surprised. There's one of my startups, which I won't name because I can't speak about it, but one of my startups I had written off for dead a little while back. It seemed like the product launched and it really wasn't doing much numbers. And out of nowhere, suddenly there's interest in an acquisition. So that happened after the fact. And it's always fun to have this equity that you'd sort of been like, well, that one wasn't a winner. But it can always happen.
Yeah, and that's a fun email to get. That, oh look, it's getting acquired, and you're going to earn some money.
Yep.
Now you oversee, as well as the working on the project. You oversee the hiring of developers. How do you find people? Do you outsource? Do you get Indian developers for some of these guys that are looking to be budget conscious? How do you find people?
So I am willing to outsource. What I prefer to do, let's talk about my favorite approach. My
Yep.
favorite approach is to install a full-time dev team at the client who's hired me. So I don't sublet. It's not like you pay Bill Boulden LLC and Bill Boulden LLC provides you developers. Instead, I'm acting on behalf of the customer to install their own employees who work for them and then mentoring them over the course of the next 2 or 3 months so that they can carry things on after I'm gone and building a team that will outlive me. That's my preferred way to work. Now, sometimes the capital isn't there to hire full-time devs, in which case I have preferred vendors who I work with over and over again. I work with this one vendor called Forcoda a lot. Big shout out to Lena at Forcoda. There's another vendor, Thirsty Sprout, that I work with quite often. Big shout out to David. I wind up going to Eastern Europe a lot, actually.
To find developers?
Yes. One of my companies is in very good hands right now with 2 Eastern European developers who are just fantastic.
Awesome. That's fantastic. And what are some of the best ones that you have worked on? So you talked about the Hello Audio. What's that one all about?
So this is really cool, and it's the product I'm proudest of building. It's, well, I can't talk about it without talking about the founders. So the founders are a husband and wife team who ran a podcast and then a course about how to launch podcasts. So they basically made their careers by making a podcast that taught you how to make other podcasts, sort of a meta podcast. They had this vision for a podcast host that was unlike any other on the market. And one of the things I look for when I'm evaluating which founders I want to work with is I look for them to have superpowers in their field. Like, what is it about you that makes it so that you alone are perfect to launch this company? Because I always say, people will steal your idea, but they can't steal your execution. So I saw in these founders a great execution because only they had been podcasters about podcasting and knew podcasting inside and out. So they had this vision for a podcast host that worked unlike any other podcast host. It serves individual customizable podcast feeds that you can change up the order and the delivery of things on, and even customize individual episodes. So imagine a private podcast where you can have it say, "Hi, Julian, here's today's episode." You can do really cool things with it. And they had this vision based on the things they'd learned in their podcasting journey. And I worked at that company for about 18 months, seeing them through, and they're very healthy and well now.
Awesome.
I said goodbye to them about 6 months ago because they were all taken care of, but we're still on great terms.
Awesome. So you like working with founders, and it's more important the people that you're working with rather than the idea as such. So that's when it works. What about some of the problems that you've seen? What are some of the mistakes that founders make with startups that don't really work that well?
Okay, so I've seen a lot of mistakes. I have just as many L's under my belt as I do W's. And I would say that there are 2 chief pitfalls I want to warn people against. The first one is building your product before you've validated product market fit. So this is not news. There's people always talking about this, but I look for someone who has built a warm audience already before I'll work with them, because I'm done taking 30 to 50 grand from somebody, building them a great, polished, well-usable app, launching it, and seeing it get 5 users. I need the person to have done their homework and proven out that there is a market for what they've done. And there are a lot of ways of doing this. This is something I love consulting on, is finding ways to establish product market fit before you've bought something. Make a web flow. Make a web flow that's like the product is real already. Hook it up to a type form that harvests email addresses. Save them in an Airtable. Or a common one I get is people come to me with these community building apps. Like, oh, I want a Facebook, but just focused on mountain climbers or something. Like, I want the premier app for mountain climbing. And I'll always say, prove to me that you can grow a subreddit or a Discord to 1,000 people first. Because if you can't get 1,000 interested people to join a community oriented around talking about this thing, when it's a subreddit or a Discord, which is free, you're not going to be able to get them to join when it's your custom app.
Yeah, and that's the thing, isn't it? It's the marketing is a lot of founders don't think about marketing, or they don't know about marketing, and the ability to sort of build that audience, that's half the battle. And I was looking at a lot of startup memes, and they talk about the founders getting stuck in this cycle of continually adding features just to avoid doing any marketing. And it's so important to really look at the marketing side of things.
Yeah, precisely. The other thing that I've seen over and over again is going too far. Hang on, I have to not use a non-family friendly phrase. Going too far in your own head with the tech. Most of the time, your customers will not care what tech stack you used. They only care if it's good enough and doesn't break and does the job. And I have seen startup after startup fail because they had engineers who were more interested in engineering than delivering features to the customer. And a great example of this was I worked for a company about 3 years ago. It was one of my bigger failures. I was brought in at the 18-month point. They were launching a blockchain product. And it was a B2B SaaS for the banking industry that could put payment information on a blockchain ledger. And it had been in development for 18 months with no launch to production on the horizon. I found when I got there that they had forked 2 major open source blockchain projects and built their own consensus algorithms and their own hashing algorithms. They were frankly having too much fun. All the development effort was going towards building their own consensus algorithms and having a great time being blockchain engineers. And I'm like, where's the UI? Where's the part where people log in? Where's the my account page? Where's the report and issue page? Where's the fundamental part of this where a banking user sees the transaction ledger? And they're like, oh, we're still working on all that. I was able to tell them to stop working on the fun stuff, work on the necessary stuff. And we got to launch in time, but right around in time for the company to run out of capital. So I would really caution against going with the latest, greatest thing or having too much fun with the engineering. You have to be putting features in front of users.
So you're balanced because you're the tech side, but also you're very conscious of customer experience and making something that people want. And a lot of the tech guys that do the building, they lack that kind of end vision, I suppose. So it's good that you're quite balanced, I think, in your way of viewing it as a product that needs to be created for people, humans.
Yeah, that's one thing that sets me apart. And I would say if I had a superpower, it's that I am not a CTO who like stays in their lane, who is like, talk to me when it's about code. Otherwise, I don't know. Like, I've been at so many small startups where I've had to wear every hat, including the social media marketing hat, including the customer support, customer success, help desk hats, sometimes intermittently even the sales hat, that I will get involved in every part of your startup and offer 360-degree advice, while acknowledging that some of those other things are not my strong suit.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great. Good skill set to have your finger in all of those pies. And we talked briefly about tech stacks and what are the best tech stacks to use. So the kind of, the stuff that you're going to build it with. What do you prefer to use that's going to allow people, I guess, to quickly build something and bring it to market?
So first, I look for the no-code stack, which is trying to find a way to build their product without writing any code. Sometimes all you have to do is hook up a Webflow to a Typeform to an Airtable and build a few Zapier zaps, and you've got a product. That's preferable. Now, let's say, of course, as good as I am at talking people out of building apps, let's say that they're going to go with me and we're going to build a web platform of some kind. Over and over again, I've had success with this same stack, which is Amazon Web Services for the hosting, using Next.js for the front end, and using serverless lambdas written in Node.js for the back end. It's very scalable, and I generally don't run into scaling problems at my startups. Hello Audio is serving about 5,000 podcasts a second, which is quite a bit of scale. And their serverless lambdas have scaled up flawlessly to take on that load. So I really like the AWS Next and serverless lambdas stack. I also don't mind Python if you're doing something that's more AI or ML focused. But I shy away from things like Vue, Angular, the Google Cloud Platform, and niche languages. Like, there's a lot of languages that are better than JavaScript. There really are. Nobody's saying JavaScript is the best language here. And I understand that things like Elixir or Scala can be a lot more powerful, but you're setting the company up to have a much harder time hiring in the
Yeah.
future after you're gone. And I don't ever want to leave somebody being this person who's on the job market and saying, oh, our last developer wrote the whole thing in Ruby on Rails. We're locked into finding a Rails dev.
Yeah. Is that the reason why you prefer to go with the no-code solution, so that you can leave people with like a turnkey thing that they're able to actually work on without you being there all the time?
Yeah, as somebody who's very much a temporary employee at all these places, I'm always thinking about the day that I leave after the product is built. When the client goes from the hot zone to the warm zone to the cold zone, and I transition into being break in case of emergency, I'm always thinking about the day I'm not there anymore. Documentation, training my replacements, educating the founders on what they can do on their own without needing me.
Awesome. And what sort of trends are you seeing at the moment? There's been some trends in the past where there's lots of startup apps that seem to be servicing similar themes. What do you reckon is the next big thing that's going to blow up?
Well, we could hold a whole separate podcast about this, but I'm a little bit bearish on Web3. I think it's a buzzword in search of a solution right now. So I don't think it's necessarily Web3 that's going to blow up. I think that tools by devs for devs are really blowing up right now. So you look at some of the biggest wins right now, and they're tools that developers can use to develop better in no-code environments. Like, for instance, Auth0, which is a authentication provider that stores usernames and passwords so your app doesn't have to. You can plug and play them into any number of other apps and save yourself from writing authentication code, which is something you never want to be writing yourself, because if something goes wrong with authentication, you've got a serious problem. Another great example is tools like Twilio that send text messages on behalf of your application and do messaging, or Stripe, which processes credit cards for your application without you having to write credit card processing yourself. I find that when I'm building an app, I'm able to staple together about a dozen of these at a time. And then the amount of code I have to write, I just finished an engagement with a company called Dovey Dates. Very cool company. They do dates in virtual reality. I just finished an engagement
what
with
was
them.
that big thing that was kind of early internet, that Second Life, or is it like that?
Second Life. Yeah, it's like a place where you and a long distance partner can go experience a sushi dinner or an aquarium or an escape room together in VR.
Interesting.
But I just finished an engagement with them where I built out the back end for a new application for them. And we stapled together so many other excellent tools that the totality of the code I had to write fit in 3 files. And they're not big files. They're about 500 lines each.
That's cool. And that's hard to break, I guess, as well. It's going to be stable.
Yeah, it's got a very small attack surface.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. Well, that's really cool, Bill, and some interesting stuff there. I know I have some people that are, in the midst of building and looking at building things. And how do you sort of approach new projects? Do people contact you on the website to have a chat to you?
Yes, there are 2 great ways to get in touch with me. The first one is through billboulden.com, Boulden, where you can apply to have me consult on your next startup that you want to launch. The other great way is LinkedIn, where I live at linkedin.com/in/Bill Boulden, Boulden. I'm very responsive on LinkedIn, and you can always start a conversation with me about what I can do. I have several types of engagements available, ranging from an hour to a day to a month to indefinite. So I can pick the right size engagement that suits how much your needs are for startup tech consulting.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's great. And like you said, even if they want to contract you as a fractional CTO, that can be done at a fraction of the cost of hiring. And I think it's very attractive to a lot of bootstrap, startups. And I think it's good to be a bootstrap startup in a way, because it teaches you to be lean, and you don't need to have all of that, investor money, which can lead to people being a little bit inefficient and failing, I guess. If you can find the really efficient way of doing it, Bill might be the man to speak to.
Well, thank you so much.
Wonderful. Well, thanks for coming on, Bill. That was really, really interesting. And I might have you on again in the future. We'll see as we go. Thanks very much, Bill Boulden.
Thank you so much for having me, Julian.
Thanks everyone for watching, and I'll see you very soon on another episode. Thanks, Bill. That was cool.
Yeah, I think that went pretty well. I think I could bring a lot of value to your listeners.
Definitely. Yeah. No, I mean, I always, my gauge is, if I'm interested, then other people will be interested. You know what I mean? If I'm falling asleep, then the guests will be falling asleep.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Bill. There's a bit of a lag at the moment. But what I'll do, once I publish that, I'll send you through an email with something that you can share.
Okay. Awesome. I will share it on my LinkedIn and my Twitter.
Wonderful. Thanks, Bill. Have a great evening, day in New York.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah.